Hi everyone, today I wanted to talk about a topic that is near and dear to me, and that is why I decided to stay in El Paso after leaving the military. A little bit of background on myself. I'm an Army veteran. I was stationed here at Fort Bliss in El Paso for about 5 years, and I got out in 2019. I had spent pretty much the majority of my time here in Fort Bliss in El Paso. Prior to that, I was in Oklahoma, and then I spent 4 years as a cadet at West Point. So I've had a little bit of experience in the military, not too much, not too many different duty stations, but El Paso was unique for me because when I was a cadet at West Point in 2013, I had actually taken a visit to El Paso for a 3-week internship. They call it CTLT. And that was when I was a cadet. So I could kind of get a feel for Fort Bliss, I could get a feel for El Paso, and I could get a feel for the units and things like that here. So I was pretty astonished when I came here to El Paso because unlike a lot of other military duty stations, especially in the Army, El Paso is actually a pretty big city, and it's got its own culture separate from the base, which I really liked because I had visited, West Point, I had visited Fort Sill, and I know of a lot of other military bases where the town is basically centered around the military base. But El Paso was different for me in the sense that El Paso doesn't really need Fort Bliss. It certainly helps, and there is kind of a synergy within the community there for El Paso and Fort Bliss. But there's a lot of other things, and there's a lot of other things to do, and a lot of other culture, and a lot of other people that are not even related to the military at all. So that's something that really appealed to me when I made my visit here. I know a lot of people complain about El Paso or Fort Bliss, especially if they're not from here. It's a little bit of a culture shock to some people in the military, but I really grew to like it over the past 3 or 4 years that I was stationed there. And I had bought a house here. I had kind of put a little bit of roots down. And then when I was getting out, I had a decision to make whether I wanted to stay here in El Paso. I had started my real estate business, or did I want to try to go somewhere else, maybe go back to my hometown, maybe a different city. So I ultimately decided to stay here in El Paso for a couple of reasons. One, I had started my real estate business, so I had built up a clientele while I was on active duty part-time, and it really helped me transition from the military. And then 2, I really liked El Paso, and I thought it was a great place to live regardless of having a business here or not. So I know that could be a controversial opinion sometimes, and a lot of people in the military, if they're PCSing here, they do feel pretty strongly about that sometimes. Some people really hate El Paso, others really love it. I know there's always a battle in the comment section of a YouTube video or some of the Facebook groups that we have of people who seem to hate it, but I just wanted to share my perspective on it and why I decided to stay. So a few reasons I decided to stay, some of the pros and some of the cons, right? So some of the pros that I really liked about El Paso, one would be just the cost of living is pretty low compared to a lot of other cities. For example, the rents, if you decide to rent something or if you want to buy something, the prices here are much lower than other major metropolitan areas. Even like in East Texas, like Austin or Dallas, you can find a place for a much lower price here in El Paso. The second reason would just be the great weather here. I like the weather a lot. It's not perfect, but I originally grew up in Florida, so we would have hurricanes and it'd be super humid during the summer, and you would just like leave your house sweating. But El Paso, it's a dry heat, and you actually get seasons here. So the summer is pretty hot, but the fall and the spring, they're less hot, and then the winter can get cold or cool. So you actually get a pretty good variety of seasons here, unlike a place like Florida where it's just like hot year round. So I really did like that a lot. We don't really have any major weather events like hurricanes or no natural disasters like earthquakes or anything like that. So the weather can be quite pleasant, I think. Another reason I chose El Paso as my first duty station and why I chose to stay is that there's actually a lot of stuff to do here. So we have, I believe, almost 800,000 people that live in El Paso, and that's not including the people that live across the border in Juarez. So El Paso is a pretty big city in its own, and there's a lot of things to do here. Like we have a Topgolf, we have iFly, we have all this stuff that they're adding in. We have a Whole Foods. I mean, it's a pretty modern city with a lot of different amenities, and that's not including like all the different local things that you could do. So it's a pretty big city with its own, you don't have to like travel anywhere. Like when I was in Lawton, I had to travel to OKC if I really wanted to do anything in a city or go out somewhere. Here, everything is right here. So that's something that I really loved about El Paso. The next thing I really liked is a lot of people are like me. They're either active duty or they're veterans. A lot of veterans decide to stay in El Paso too for the reasons I just mentioned. And there's a pretty strong veteran community here, which I love, not just because of the base, but also people that have gotten out and decided to stay. So there's a lot of veteran resources here, great community of vets here. So a lot of people that have gone through what you have as a veteran, or if you're active duty, there's a lot of resources for you here as well. So really strong military presence, really strong like veteran presence. And that's something that I do like compared to living in a different area. The last reason I think is a little more intangible, and that would be for me, and I know a lot of other people probably have this experience as well, is coming to a new city in a different area in the United States. People say it can be a culture shock, but I think you should look at that as an opportunity. Something I do like about El Paso is that it's different. You know, there's obviously like a lot of Mexican culture here. So I think that is a good opportunity to experience new culture, new language, new food. There's a lot of different things that you can try for the first time. So me being from Florida, I was not experienced with any of this, and I didn't really look at it as a culture shock. I looked at it as an opportunity to try new things. I've noticed that like when I've been living here for the past 3 years, a lot of my eating habits have changed. I picked up some Spanish, and it's a pretty cool opportunity, I think. And it's really all about your mindset and how you look at it. And yeah, you could stay closed off. You could be kind of resistant to that change, or you could look at it as an opportunity to learn something new. And, you know, if you don't stay here, you could always take that with you. I think is pretty interesting and get some different perspectives on life. So that's another advantage of living in El Paso versus I think some other areas, is that you do get that different cultural experience, which I think is pretty cool. Now, El Paso is not perfect. There's a few things I do not like about living here, and I want to give you the full experience. That way you can make an informed decision. The two things that I really don't like, especially if you own property, our property taxes are pretty high here. That's probably the biggest complaint you'll see online, either like in Facebook groups or YouTube or whatever. So our property taxes are not great here. They're even like slightly higher than a lot of other places in Texas. So there's some things you can do to kind of combat those high property taxes. I've made a video about this, and we have a Facebook group that I'll drop in the description. So there's some techniques to get around that, but it's still pretty hard. The taxes are still pretty high here for property taxes. So it is factored into your monthly payment whenever you're looking at buying a place, but it's definitely annoying for sure. And then the second thing is there's not a lot of other major cities around. We have like our metro, like border area here with El Paso and across the border, but other than that, there's not really any major cities. Like the East Coast, you could drive, you know, an hour and a half to the next major city, or, you know, 2 hours to New York if you're in Boston, or, you know, wherever. But here in El Paso, it's, you know, I think the next major city is like Albuquerque, and that's like 5 hours away or 6 hours away. So it's pretty far. Everything is a little isolated over here. And that goes the same for like your airport. Like if you're flying out of El Paso, you usually have to make connections to other major like hubs like Dallas or Houston or Denver or wherever. So it's a little bit more isolated than somewhere like the East Coast, where you could kind of get everywhere you need to by driving. And the distances out here are just much more vast than some other areas. I hope this video was informative if you are thinking about a PCS move here, or if you're in the military right now at Fort Bliss and thinking about retiring or ETSing and staying in El Paso. Wanted to give you another perspective from a fellow veteran of what it's like, and hopefully this can help you get an idea of the culture and the lifestyle here in El Paso. If you do need help with buying a house or any other kind of real estate help, please feel free to reach out to us. We're going to leave our contact information in the description, and if you like the content, please like and subscribe to the channel.